Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your lunch break. We're back here at the Public Service Commission in docket number 2021 3 E. Before we begin, we're going to take roll. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners um, Thomas, C. Williams, Powers, Belzer, J. Williams, and joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Irvin and Caston. Duke Energy Carolinas, if you would please call your last witness.
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Excuse me.
this is Kate Mixon with SACE and CCL. I just had one quick preliminary question, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We were just wondering whether we may be able to request the ability to make a closing statement at the conclusion of the witness's testimony before we adjourn.
Sure. How long do you think your closing statement will take?
It should be no more than 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Does any other party wish to make a closing statement?
Not to be outdone, Mr. Chairman, yes, I think we'd like to request the same.
Okie dokie. All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chris Huber from ORS. I'd like to reserve the right to make a closing. We may not, but I'd just like to reserve the right to make a short closing.
Understood. And anyone else who wants to make a closing is welcome to do so within the 5-minute time frame. All right. Duke Energy Carolinas, if you would please call your next witness.
Mr. Chairman, the company would call Mr. John Suez to the stand.
Mr. Suez, if you would take the stand and pause to be sworn in by our court reporter.
If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Suez, and sweet. Mr. Suez, would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is John D. Suez.
Attorney Welborn, we are having trouble hearing you in the hearing room. We may need you to start yelling again. Sorry about that.
Yes, sir. I will try. Is this any better in the hearing room?
It is, but you're still a little faint.
Thank you. I'll lean in too. Maybe that'll help.
That does help.
Thank you. Mr. Suez, by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am employed by Duke Energy as Managing Director of Trading and Dispatch.
And how long have you worked in the generation commitment, dispatch, and power trading fields?
I have approximately 29 years of experience in the utility industry related to generation commitment, dispatch, and power trading.
What is your educational background?
I have a degree in mechanical engineering and a master's of business administration and am a registered professional engineer.
Would you please describe for the commission any prior roles that you've held that are relevant to your testimony filed in this proceeding?
Sure. I have worked in generation commitment, dispatch, and power trading since 1992 when I joined PSI Energy. In 2003, I assumed the position of manager, real-time operations, and in 2006, I became the Director of Generation Dispatch and Operations with responsibility for generation dispatch, unit commitment, 24-hour real-time operations, and plant communications related to short-term generation maintenance planning for Duke Energy. During the period of 2010 through 2017, I also managed the DEC generation dispatch function.
Thank you. Would you please describe your current responsibilities at the company?
As Managing Director of Trading and Dispatch for DEC, I lead the organization responsible for power trading on behalf of Duke Energy Corporation's regulated utilities in the Carolinas, Florida, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, as well as generation dispatch on behalf of Duke Energy's regulated utilities in Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Suez. Mr. Chairman, based on Mr. Suez's education and extensive experience, I propose to tender Mr. Suez as an expert in the field of generation commitment and dispatch.
All right. Is there any cross-examination? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to qualify your witness as an expert. And because I couldn't really hear you, I heard the dispatch portion, but in the field of say that again.
Yes, sir. Generation commitment and dispatch.
Okay. Mr. Suez is qualified as an expert in generational commitment and dispatch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to clarify, that's generation commitment and dispatch. So generating the commitment and dispatch of generating units, in other words. I think we're on the same page.
All right.
Mr. Suez, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 22 pages of publicly filed rebuttal testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding and 22 pages of confidential rebuttal testimony that were hand-delivered to the commission?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you the same questions this afternoon that were contained within your rebuttal testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would be.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Suez's public pre-filed rebuttal testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that his confidential rebuttal testimony be entered into the record and that it remain under seal.
Mr. Suez's public rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand, and his confidential rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record and remain under seal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Suez, would you please provide a summary of your rebuttal testimony at this time?
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. The purpose of my rebuttal testimony is to respond to the testimony of SACE CCL witness Debbie Glick related to DEC's unit commitment and dispatch of its coal generation stations. I also explain why the commission should not accept her proposal to disallow a portion of DEC's costs from this proceeding. Witness Glick's testimony contains many improper assumptions and calculations that have no connection to actual utility operations, and there are several concerning aspects of her analysis. First, her analysis fails to recognize the fact that DEC unit commitment seeks to minimize production costs to serve a given amount of customer demand within reliability constraints. Her analysis calculates generator margin using system lambda data without regard to customer demand. Second, her analysis unreasonably assumes that the company has an unlimited amount of generation available at the lambda price. She frequently states that it would have been, quote, less costly to serve retail ratepayers with other resources, end quote, but fails to offer any credible or specific explanations of how the company could have replaced the thousands of megawatts of reliable generation energy and capacity, or identify any specific resource that should have been dispatched to serve customers absent these generating resources. Simply put, this hypothetical alternative generation did not exist at the given lambda price. Third, witness Glick improperly equates the lambda data to the total compensation of a generating unit, which is more appropriate for an analysis made for generators in a RTO, that is a regional transmission organization, rather than a utility like a DEC. System lambda is not an appropriate measure of whether a unit commitment decision is economic because it is a calculation of instantaneous system incremental costs, while unit commitment decisions are based on the total variable costs over a multi-day period. Fourth, Ms. Glick's analysis fails to recognize additional physical costs of a generator that are required in order to produce energy, such as startup and no-load costs. In doing so, she ignores the real costs of commitment associated with starting a unit and keeping it online, but which are not related to a change in generation output. Her analysis assumes that a marginal generating unit can be turned online and kept online with zero cost, but this ignores the physical realities of startup and no-load costs incurred by the utility in its actual plant operations. Fifth, Ms. Glick's analysis fails to properly recognize the need to run units for reliability or operating reserves. The company's unit commitment plan includes 1,770 megawatts of these reserves, which are available capacity above the expected peak load to account for potential loss of a unit, regulating reserves, or load forecasting error. At times, reliability needs require that a coal unit be turned on to ensure day-ahead planning reserves are met. By ignoring these needs, Witness Glick is artificially increasing the perceived cost of alleged uneconomic commitment of generating units at the expense of reliability. Sixth, her analysis selectively and improperly uses averaged data over a longer period in order to draw certain conclusions. I fundamentally disagree with the comparison of monthly production costs to System Lambda because it ignores the way in which a utility actually operates its system on an hourly basis to ensure reliable and economic service. And the comparison does not provide an accurate picture concerning the hours in which the units were called to operate. Further, averaging all instantaneous values ignores the variability that is experienced during real-world operations. To average these values over a full month provides even less value because it ignores the obligation to provide constant, reliable service to customers. Her analysis ignores the fact that a unit may have been critical to responding to customer demands during a shorter period of time and fails to acknowledge that a unit with a higher average cost is often still critical in ensuring reliability. Finally, Ms. Glick's analysis incorrectly implies that fixed costs should be included in unit commitment and dispatch decisions, which could actually result in uneconomic outcomes and inflate costs for customers. She fails to recognize that the inclusion of fixed costs into commitment and dispatch decisions is inappropriate because fixed fuel-related costs are sunk. In other words, they will be incurred whether or not a unit is committed and dispatched. As noted in my rebuttal testimony, I disagree with Ms. Glick's analysis that the company's practices are in any way imprudent. If the company had decommitted its coal fleet as suggested by Witness Glick, the company would have been forced to operate without adequate day-ahead planning reserves, rely on non-firm energy purchases to maintain reliability, purchase more expensive energy than would have been decommitted, and resort to curtailing customer load multiple times. I recommend that the Commission not impose reporting requirements as proposed by Witness Glick. The information she seeks is available to the parties and was provided to the parties in discovery. I also recommend that the Commission reject the other recommendations of Ms. Glick as discussed further in my pre-filed testimony. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Suez. If you'd please make yourself available for questions of council and the commission.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have a few questions.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Suez. My name's Emma Clancy and I represent SACE and CCL. Can you hear me all right?
I can, and good afternoon to you too.
Thank you. Now, your title is Managing Director of Trading and Dispatch. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in that role, you're responsible for generation dispatch on behalf of Duke Energy's utilities in Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. Did I hear you say that in your summary?
That's correct.
And you did manage DEC's generation dispatch function from 2010 to 2017, correct?
That's correct.
But not currently?
That's correct.
So are you the correct person to ask about DEC's commitment and dispatch decision-making?
Yes, I believe I am. I work in a function where we all work very closely. So we are communicating constantly with each other between our generation dispatch function, unit commitment, our fuel procurement groups, and trading groups.
Thank you. And now on page 18 of your testimony, you respond to, I'll let you gather your testimony. So on page 18, you respond to Ms. Glick's observation that DEC's 4 coal units ranked in the top 75th to 90th percentile for most expensive fuel costs in 2020 among all United States coal-fired power plants, correct?
That's correct.
And you thought Ms. Glick's comparison of DEC's coal units with other units failed to fully consider differences such as location, technology, etc. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But to be clear, you're not disputing that coal is more expensive in DEC's territory than it is in other parts of the country, correct?
I was just simply stating out that the comparison amongst all these different coal units was not a valid comparison due to the fact that the units had there's differences in location, types of coal, technologies, things such as that. But in the cost as reported, no.
Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
The last sentence was, I am not disputing the costs as reported, no.
Okay, right. You give Wyoming as an example of a location where coal is less costly because it's closer to coal producing regions. Is that correct?
That's correct. In addition, it's burning the Powder River Basin coal as well.
Okay, so just generally speaking, it doesn't surprise you that coal may be more economic than in some locations than in others.
Certainly the economics of coal changes as many factors, but distance from the production areas would be one of the factors.
Right. And wouldn't you agree that being economical means considering and taking advantage of the most cost-effective resources at your disposal?
Yes, within reliability constraints, I would agree with that.
Now, you also critique Ms. Glick's testimony as fundamentally flawed because it is a backward-looking analysis, and you explain, and this is on page 15 of your testimony, you explain that the company cannot predict with 100% certainty the exact customer demand or unit availabilities ahead of time to inform its commitment and dispatch decisions. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And in a perfect world, though, would the company would be able to make those predictions with 100% certainty, right?
Yeah, I don't think that perfect world exists. I mean, what you're asking for is being able to predict like when you're gonna have a pop-up thunderstorm, whether it hits over a farm field over downtown Charlotte. So, and likewise, a perfect world would be able to forecast when a unit has an unforced outage. So, I don't think that perfect world exists, unfortunately.
Right. I'm sure you're right about that. But just so I understand, in the ideal scenario, saying that perfect world did exist, that would mean that the marginal costs the company considers in its commitment process would be as close as possible to the company's actual costs that it passes to ratepayers. Is that correct? If you could predict with 100% certainty?
No.
That's not what that would 100% certainty would ensure?
No, that would only, if you were able to forecast exactly in the future which power plants were going to operate, not in how, their availability, be able to forecast forced outages. Also, if you could forecast in the future the exact customer demand, that would just mean you have perfect information going into the model, right? You still, I think one of the things you said was your actual costs would equal your forecasted costs.
Mm-hmm.
There are, first of all, there's differences between the costs we're using for commitment and dispatch and what's actually flowing to the customer. So we're not using the actual commodity cost for our dispatch and commitment purposes. We're using the market price of that fuel plus the actual transportation cost. So there's going to be differences between the accounting, what goes into the accounting records, and what we're using for dispatch and commitment.
Okay, thank you. Now, lastly, Mr. Suez, you critiqued Ms. Glick's analysis because it was backward-looking, as in using marginal cost data that from GenTrader that was backward looking, rather than based on the cost data that the company has access to when making its unit commitment decisions. Is that right?
One of my critiques was just the recognition that when you do a backward looking analysis, you do have the perfect ability to see what actually happened. Like I just mentioned, you have you know exactly when a unit was forced off or wasn't forced off. You also know the exact customer demand. So that certainly makes it easier, but there's other aspects of the analysis that I disagreed with as well.
Okay, well, just focusing on this one critique, I did just want to understand what information you thought that Ms. Glick should have considered that she did not. And so now, could I direct you to page 19 of your rebuttal testimony?
I'm there.
So on page, in line 7, and this is, you're summarizing the data delivered to SACE and CCL. You state that the 7-day forecast sheets and the unit loading report are also outputs from the GenTrader model and do not output the model cost information, but instead show the unit commitment and dispatch plans by day, by hour. So am I understanding that to say that those reports that were provided to Ms. Glick, they do not include the cost information that the company is looking at when it is making its real-time unit commitment and dispatch decisions?
So these two particular reports that were referenced do not include cost data. That's correct. However, there was another report called the UCP, the Unit Cost Priority Report, that does show the cost of the units.
Okay, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I just want to be clear. So does the company currently keep records of the daily cost information it has available to it when it makes the 7-day forecast and informs its daily unit commitment and dispatch decisions?
Yes, that will be the UCP, the Unit Cost Priority Report that I just mentioned.
Those are records of the marginal cost data it uses to make the real-time commitment decisions.
Yes, and I don't use the word marginal, but I say average the dispatch costs, but they're the variable costs that we use to make commitment and dispatch decisions. That's right.
Okay, then because they're forwards looking?
They are the forward-looking, current and going forward cost for the short term. I'm not talking years, I'm talking right now. What the cost is, the variable cost to run the unit.
Variable cost to run the unit. Okay. And could you please explain how interveners could have accessed that information? Or as in, is it a report, or would interveners have had to go to Duke's offices to review that information?
I believe it was in one of the reports that we submitted was the UCP, again, that unit cost priority.
The unit cost priority.
Correct.
That's referenced in line 6 of your rebuttal?
That's correct.
And that's the cost, the contemporaneous cost data in that report?
That's correct.
And does the company currently, I understand that's a report, does the company retain that information in Excel format?
I don't know if it was in Excel format or if it was in PDF format. I'm not sure.
As far as you know, could the company retain that contemporaneous cost data that it looks at as it's producing those 7-day forecasts in Excel format?
Yeah, again, I use the UCP. I know I'm able to export it to Excel. I don't know if the records after the fact, when you go back and look at a year, if that data is stored in Excel or if it's a PDF. I'm just not sure.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no questions.
All right. Commissioner questions?
Chairman Williams.
Commissioner Gaston?
Afternoon, Mr. Swess.
Good afternoon.
I'm not about to ask you all the questions I have. It would take too long, and I don't want to put anyone through all that. Relative to, I guess, the fuel value of coal generation versus other fuel generation costs, does DEC have existing generation sources to offset the 6,934 megawatts of coal generating capacity?
Certainly not in every hour. Obviously, if you look at individual hours in the middle of the night, you could probably answer that question differently, but across the peak hours, certainly the answer is no.
So if DEC, was to replace that 6,934 megawatts of generation, do you know how they would do that during, I guess, I'm thinking in terms of that's existing. To replace it, would that require a capital expenditure to replace that of some other generating facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes, Commissioner.
Any idea what an estimated cost of that would be?
I mean, I'm aware, resource planning is definitely out of my area. I mean, I'm aware of the general costs of new power plants. So I know they might range from $1,000 to $1,500 per kW. But again, you're way out of my area of expertise.
If DEC were to replace it, would they replace it with a newer version of coal facility or some other generation?
Yeah, again, resource planning is not my specialty, but I'm aware that I don't think in the current economic situation the company would replace it with coal. It would replace it with other resources. Is my guess, but I'm not a resource planner.
Understand. On page 8 of your rebuttal, I think lines 7 through 12, and I was trying to understand this because this seems to be, I guess, one of the sticking points. And I think it's relative to practice of unit commitment planning and dispatching based on variable costs consistent with good utility practice. No, I'm sorry. Oh, the comparison of monthly production costs relative to system lambda, which I know you discussed, but I'm trying to understand it better. And this thought came to my head, and it may be way off base, but are you saying, for example, say a unit may be required to operate 16 hours one day, but over a month, the unit may average only, say, 2 hours a day? Is that distinction you're trying to make here?
Yes, Commissioner, that's part of the distinction. So I just first would make sure we all in agreement what system lambda is. So system lambda, again, is that cost just to move. You already got a unit online. It's already been started up. It's just that cost to move that unit up by 1 megawatt. So you move it up by 1 megawatt. What's that cost? That's what your system lambda is. So when you look at like monthly comparisons against that lambda cost, you're getting into all sorts of other areas where you're averaging, the cost of a unit for a small period of time versus a larger period of a month. It just doesn't tend to make any sense to me. I just think we have to be aware that lambda is really just that cost to move that unit up in that one instantaneous period. A very important thing for dispatch, but when you do like a monthly average, you kind of lose a lot of that.
Okay. And in some of the discussion questions, there was some discussion about all of this data and how decisions are made, how they would be made, how the model maybe works. And what I'm trying to understand to get my head around is, what was the name of the model you guys use again?
A gen trader.
Is it as simple as taking all this data, putting it in a spreadsheet and looking at, okay, this is the lambda price that's been calculated, and we're going to operate these facilities based on whether it's it's above that lambda or below that lambda, or does the model include for these unforeseen events, reserve capacity, and everything else? Does it include some scenarios or probabilistic events? What is generally involved in that model?
So to answer the first part of the question, I would say no, it's not as simple as that spreadsheet analysis. And that's part of the second part of your question is, so the inputs to GenTrader would be the things with starting with the customer demand and expected customer demand by hour for the next 7 days. Then you need to know my unit costs, all the different resources, their cost. Now you need to know, are they available or not? Are there planned outages? Then you need to know what units are required to be on for a certain reason, like testing, or maybe they're required to be on for reliability. And then the model runs through its process. It's not doing, well, I shouldn't say, I don't know if it's probabilistic, but it's looking at all the different solutions. How can it solve over this period of time to serve the customers in the lowest possible cost? So that's what that model's doing. And then it's giving, and the model says, well, the model says turn on Allen 1 and Blues Creek 1 and turn off this unit. And so that's kind of what the model's doing. Does that help?
I think so. So it's not looking at probability of events, but running an iterative process with those projected demands or demands, what the units can do, the cost factors involved in those units, and through that iterative process, determine which units to come on when and how long and such. Is that correct?
That's a good summary.
Okay. I'll probably stop there because that'll be good enough. Hopefully I won't come back later. Thank you very much. No more questions.
All right. Questions from Vice Chair Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Swez.
Good afternoon.
In talking about the lambda, does that change hourly? It's not a static number, is it?
That's a very good question, because I actually wanted to mention this earlier and I forgot, is that in real time, Lambda actually changes every 4 to 6 seconds. So it's as fast as our computers can go out and scan the SCADA information, the different meters. So in real time, it's actually changing every 4 to 6 seconds. Now at the end of the hour, when we look at the data, that's getting averaged to one number. So it's definitely not static. And even within an hour, there's going to be however many variables of 4 to 6 seconds. I mean, hundreds of lambdas in an hour, and that gets averaged that one number for the hour.
Okay. Couple of places in your testimony, you referenced the 1770 megawatt day ahead planning reserves, and I should know this, but where did that number come from to maintain in reserve?
So that number is a number that, well, it's part, let me explain the components of the number. So some of the components of the number are the regulating reserves. So what reserves do we need to maintain online to move up and down to instantaneously match our generation amount with our load, right? To keep frequency basically 60 hertz. So that's like your regulating reserves. Then you've got contingency reserves. Now you've got to have enough reserves, not necessarily online, but able to come online quickly within 10 minutes to actually replace the loss of your largest single contingency. So, you lose your largest single unit, and if you lose that, power plants can trip, they go offline as they could. Not very often, but they can go offline instantaneously. You have to have reserves you can call upon very quickly to replace that. And then the third component, or fourth, I forgot which one I was on, but anyway, the last component of that 1770 is a load forecast error. So we recognize that sometimes load can come in higher than we forecast. We want to make sure we have reserves to generate those additional, have additional resources able to generate to serve that additional possible load.
So that 1770 megawatts is critical to maintain reliability of the system and provide service to the customers. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And is that something that there'll be points during the day, would there be points during the day when maybe 1770 wouldn't be needed?
I'm trying to think for a second. So you always need the contingency reserves. You always need the regulating reserves. Of course, to answer your question, yeah, there are points in the day. So in the middle of the night, when load is lower, you're naturally going to have a lot more reserves. So you still need the same, you really still need about the same amount, but because it's the middle of the night and a lot of your resources have been reduced in output, you just naturally have a lot more reserves. Okay. So I wouldn't say there's a point in the day you don't need it, but there's a point in the day which you just have so many extra just because you're having to serve that peak load at the highest point of the day. If that makes sense, hopefully.
I think so. Thank you very much for your testimony today. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
All right. Are there any more questions for this witness? Commissioner Williams.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Good afternoon, Mr. Swez.
Good afternoon.
I'm interested in understanding more about how Duke kind of learns from its decisions and its commitments from a generation perspective, and thinking about the accuracy of your unit commitment decisions and how you might measure them, and then how you make that a part of your continuous improvement process.
Okay, very good question. So there are really a couple different types of unit commitment decisions. There are the commitment decisions we're talking about here, which is more of the larger, we're talking about the large coal units. There's also commitment decisions around individual combustion turbines and our pump storage generation. And we do a weekly meeting, we look backwards, and we ask ourselves, how did we do in committing those combustion turbines and that pump storage generation? And the reason why we focus on those units is because those are the units that really have the variability. Those are the ones where there's really more to learn. And we have a weekly meeting where we discuss, basically the learnings that we see. We would say, well, we could have committed one less combustion turbine here, or maybe run pump storage generation longer here, or pumped more there. We don't have that analysis done weekly for the coal units. And the reason is because there's really less, you tend not to have that same, well, should I have committed Blues Creek or not? It's 1100 megawatt unit. It's typically, you don't ever say, well, my load was off so much where I didn't need Blues Creek. You do have that discussion, and that happens with our combustion turbines and our pump storage, but not with the large coal units. You tend not to have that kind of error. And so I think over time, we've just haven't done that kind of analysis because it doesn't really have anything to add, but we focus on what has value to add, and that's that CTs and those pump storage generators.
So, inferring from what you said, are you saying that with the CTs, because there are more maybe options for what you would ramp up and ramp down, there's more to be learned from that, and because coal is, there's so much more that you're committing to that, you're confident when you've got to engage a coal plant.
Yeah, I think that was a good summary.
That's amazing. Thank you. Okay. Has Duke looked at seasonal decision making regarding coal plants?
I'm not sure if it's considered seasonal, but we do have a program, and another witness, Brian Walsh, is actually he's more experienced with it by far. But we do have a program that is called extended planned shutdown. I might have got that wrong, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what you would equate to seasonal operations, but it's fairly close.
Okay. And my last question, I think, is in future annual fuel cases, should hourly contemporaneous data be provided, for commitments? Should that be a part of your application?
Well, I think in the data request that we responded to here, I honestly don't know what else we could have provided. And the word contemporaneous, I know that means basically our real-time cost information, and that was provided in the data response, and it's called the UCP I mentioned earlier. Certainly we would do what the commission asked. I'm not sure if it would add value or not. So I don't know the answer to your question, quite honestly.
I appreciate that honesty. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Okay. Are there any more questions for this witness? Any redirect?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just one quick question. Mr. Swez, hopefully y'all can hear me okay. Ms. Clancy asked you, Mr. Swez, about the different sets of data that the company had produced in discovery. Did you have a chance to review the letter that the company filed this morning regarding the discovery provided by the company?
Yes, I did.
Did you review the assertions contained within that letter, the factual assertions, including the list of data sets that the company had provided to SACE and CCL?
Yes, I did.
Did you hear earlier when Mr. Chairman mentioned that the contents of the letter appeared to represent the position of the company as related to the discovery that it provided to SACE and CCL in this proceeding?
Yes.
Would you agree that that's an accurate summation, that the letter represents the position of the company as related to the discovery produced in this docket?
Yes, I would.
Thank you, Mr. Swez. Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter that record that was filed, enter that letter that was filed this morning into the record as a hearing exhibit.
All right. Let's see. How will we identify this? So Duke Energy Carolina's letter regarding discovery issue will be marked and entered into the record as hearing exhibit 15.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all the redirect that I have.
All right. So that was our last witness. How many closing arguments will we hear today?
We intend to provide some closing remarks, Mr. Chairman.
All right. One from the company and one from SACE CCL. How about the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Mr. Chairman, we do not anticipate making one, but we would like to, I guess, normally the applicant would go last. I guess we'd like to hear the closing from, to the extent we can, we'd like to hear the closing from the other parties first.
Understood. Are the lawyers prepared to proceed, or do we need to take a quick 5-minute break so you can get your thoughts together?
I wouldn't mind a 5-minute break, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's take 5. Let's go ahead and make it even 10. We'll be back at 2:13. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're here at the Public Service Commission in docket number 2021-3-E, excuse me. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners Thomas C. Williams Powers, Belzer J. Williams, and joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Irvin and Caston. The parties have presented their cases, and we are about to hear closing arguments. Attorney Mixon, if you would, please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. At the outset, I just want to say this is the moment where I can publicly eat crow and admit that we made a mistake. It appears that in the large quantity of data that we were provided, that we did miss an embedded link in one response from Duke that had a spreadsheet providing the company's hourly cost projections for the 7-day forecast. There are still aspects of the format of the data that the company provided that would render the type of analysis that Ms. Glick conducts essentially impossible. To the extent that we claimed that the company didn't provide any hourly cost information, we formally retract those claims and apologize for the misunderstanding and the disputes that it created here today and yesterday at the hearing. To the main point, in this docket, Duke seeks to pass along costs related to running its coal units. Coal plants are already among the most, if not the most, expensive generation resources, and Duke's coal units are among the most expensive units in the country, which the company does not dispute. Even after taking into consideration when the company needed to operate its coal units due to customer demand, reliability, operating reserves, and testing, Witness Glick still found that there were long periods of time, even months, when Duke could have saved ratepayers money simply turning those coal units off. Due to the company's unreasonable commitment of its coal units during those periods, we recommend a $3.8 million disallowance. This amount represents just the most egregiously unreasonable of the company's fuel expenditures. Their excess costs that the company knowingly incurred as a result of sustained uneconomic operations at its coal units over weeks or months at a time. The company is required by statute to make every reasonable effort to minimize fuel costs that it passes along to customers. The South Carolina Supreme Court, in its decision in the Granite Water case recently, has reaffirmed the Commission's authority to use cost disallowance to create incentives for utilities to improve their business practices. The bottom line is this: relative to every other resource on DEC system, companies' coal plants are more expensive, more inflexible, and incur higher costs at nearly every stage of their operation. And that trend is only expected to get worse. The company should be evaluating and improving its practices to figure out how to minimize these costs to its customers, and it has not done so. And that is unreasonable. For those reasons, we respectfully ask the Commission to adopt the recommendations of Witness Glick and disallow Duke from recovering $3.8 million in excess fuel costs in this proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mixon. Attorney Wilburn.
Yes, sir. Just wondering if Mr. Huber had a closing statement or not, but I can launch in if you're ready.
I think Mr. Huber is operating under the long-standing tradition that ORS usually goes last.
Excuse me. Yes, sir. I'll go now then. Thank you. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, as y'all well know, the purpose of this proceeding of the annual fuel cost recovery docket is provided in the Fuel Statute, South Carolina Code, annotated 58-27-865, which is that the rates placed into effect be in an amount designed to recover the fuel costs over the next 12 months and to make a true-up or adjustment based on the preceding 12-month period. Something that happened in this case is that ORS and the company identified a material and unanticipated change in one of the inputs to the rates which was an unexpected increase in the fuel commodity prices. You heard testimony that that unexpected change is atypical and that a similar change happened in 2013. And in that case, the change was a decrease, which was passed along to the benefit of customers. You also heard in this case witnesses from the company and ORS testify about the large endeavor that is required in putting together a fuel case. There are a lot of moving parts that have to all come together, and you heard testimony that waiting until the last minute to throw a fuel case together would not be in customers' best interest. Regarding the company's commitment and dispatch decisions, you also heard testimony from ORS about how the company was forthcoming and transparent in its production of data and in its explanation of that data. ORS represents the public interest. It has no bias in this case, unlike certain other parties, and it reviewed and analyzed all of the information provided by the company in this case, and it had no recommended disallowances. Further, the companies to this case had full discovery rights, and they exercised those rights. Mr. Suez, who just left the stand, is a seasoned expert in commitment and dispatch. He testified that the company provided all of the various data sets that it could think to provide, and recognizing that these data sets are complicated, what the company did in its discovery was offered to meet with other parties to explain the data that it was providing. Nevertheless, in spite of all of this data that was provided to other parties and Mr. Suez's expert review of WitnessClick's testimony and work papers, he found that that testimony and the work papers contained many improper assumptions and calculations that have no connection to his experience of utility operations, and that there were several concerning aspects of her analysis. In closing, I would respectfully remind the Commission that this is not a resource planning docket. We're not here to talk about what resources that the company wishes it had at its disposal, resources that other parties wish the company had at its disposal. The purpose of this proceeding is so that the company can recover its fuel costs. Thank you very much for your time and your attention during this hearing. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, sir. Attorney Huber, would you like to exercise your opportunity for closing arguments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are not going to present a closing at this time. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. All right, lawyers, let's talk about proposed orders. My understanding is that the rates in this case are expected to go in effect on October 1. So what is a reasonable time to expect proposed orders from the lawyers? We'll start with ORS.
Mr. Chairman, we were thinking maybe a week and a half, if possible, the 23rd or 24th of September.
Okay. Will that work with the other parties?
I think that works for the company, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that works for Citizen CCL as well.
So I'm hearing the 23rd or the 24th. Now, I've heard this several times, and so I want to offer some grace. I've heard that everyone is overworked, or I should say working a lot. So is the 23rd realistic, or should it be more so the 24th?
If the commission would allow it, ORS would request the 24th.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Likewise for Citizen CCL.
All right. So if we're okay, so we can do the 24th. Is it reasonable to have a deadline of noon on the 24th?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, for ORS.
All right. So proposed orders.
Yes,
all right.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, lawyers. All right. So the commission will expect to receive proposed orders from the parties on September 24th by noon, 12 p.m. And if there are any other issues that need to be discussed, please reach out through the appropriate channels. Attorney David Stark is the lawyer assigned to this case. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.